explained it to everybody.
That's
where I come from.
You will know that some people are even sitting in the front of the church, so that works. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start off the meeting with just a few comments and mainly a very big thank you. Our core team has traveled the 100 miles of the Bayshore in the last 4 days. We had a fabulous time. When my wife asked me what I was doing, I said I had a 4-day eco-tourism vacation. Riding through the area with the key experts that knew every nook and cranny that even though I've traveled the Bayshore a lot, I didn't know much about. So, but a special thank you to all of you here, because I think almost everybody here was some part of our tour during the past 4 days. And I think the thing that touched us the most was how much you care about your region and how it's a very personal thing to many people across Delaware. So I'm excited about today. Ben, as promised, will unveil his perspective, first draft on what the Bayshore might look like as a branded entity. The core team has not had any preview, so we are seeing it for the first time, just as you will. So without further ado, Ben.
Great, thank you, Steve. All right, I'm gonna up the challenge and turn the lights off, so it's my job to keep you awake. I want to echo Steve's intro, and I want to thank you all. It's so nice to stand up in front of a group that we have sat down and talked with each one of you over the course of the week. A lot of you were kind enough to take time out to tour us around to help make sure that we became very familiar with your place and the place that you're passionate about. And I'm really excited about this first round of kind of recommendations to you all. And I want to jump right in. I'm going to do my best to keep this down to the 3-hour presentation we promised. And no, actually, we're going to shoot to get you out of here in about an hour. But I do have a lot I want to talk about. When we talk about the Bayshore, we're doing a couple things simultaneously, and hopefully, if there are no auditors in the room, I want to be able to talk candidly from a strategy standpoint, because we have several things that overlap. Obviously, the first and foremost goal here is branding the Bayshore Byway. The Byway is a already invested in transportation infrastructure that by creating this brand, we are able to use that transportation infrastructure to drive additional users to the different areas throughout this Bayshore. Now, layered on top of that is the whole concept of creating the Delaware Bayshore brand. The brand of a region as a product. And the thing that's kind of interesting about that is there's absolutely no reason that those things need to be disconnected. In fact, they're intimately connected. And we can create a brand simultaneously. We can use the byway as the artery by which to see these things. But we can also introduce an open source brand of the region that will allow the activities, amenities, and destinations throughout that region to connect to this regional brand, allowing a product that is easy to adapt and adopt from a county or state tourism level, also an identity that's easy to lean on from a local municipality or organizational level. So we had absolutely fantastic weather, barring about 30 minutes in Port Penn, where the entire team got quite soaked. But it was a fantastic week. And we were able to see a lot. We were able to, it was great for me because I lived my life playing off of the connection that people have with the place. That passion point between people and home. And I'm very proud to call Delaware my home now. And I got to spend an entire week discovering a whole new facet of my new home. And it really has expanded things that I can be proud of. So like all week long, I've been going back and I've been telling stories. And I mean, I've had great conversations. I was telling my father-in-law 2 nights ago about some of the stuff that we saw, and he told me stories about my grandfather-in-law who used to sneak out of work, go over to Little Creek, go fishing, and was in contact with German prisoners of war that were doing work in Little Creek down from Delaware City. And he still, to this day, has a leather wallet that one of those German prisoners of war made him. And, so you always will find these very interesting stories, and then anything from, hearing about all the NASCAR drivers that love to go to the Village Inn to eat seafood. And the number of people that we run into. The team had a tour yesterday morning from the Parks and Rec director in Milford via New Zealand who loves Sambos. So there's this great connectivity throughout the state. Now, one of the things that I always like to do is I like to build a communication system. And that communication system is based off a series of components. The components allow for consistency. So one of the things that I always like to stick with is, see if I can get a remote that's going to work. Talk about prepared. I have 2 remotes. And both of them. Okay, we'll do it by hand. So, we start off with a color palette. Now, colors are hugely important, and here the colors were really easy. What I actually did, I've got this cool process where when I take photos, I can load all the photos that I take into a program that then analyzes the color content of those photos. And after analyzing that collective color content, it actually generates the colors that appear most frequently. So guess what? You've got a 5-color color palette that is directly derived from our tour throughout the entire Bayshore. Now, is anyone surprised that greens and blues come out so prominently? Now, what's kind of interesting about this is when we think about it, obviously, we've got 2 tones of blue, we've got 2 tones of green that very much connects with all of our natural resources and our natural offerings. But then we also have this very interesting color that very much is derived from a civic or man-made perspective. So having this relationship between towns and the nature that surrounds them is an ongoing theme that we're going to see as we go through this process. So we went through, we defined the 5 different colors. Then from there, I also started to play around a little bit with typeface, using uniform typeface. Now, I wanted to keep it simple. I knew that we had a couple constraints. First of all, we need a typeface that is going to be viewable in signage. It's going to be readable. So I ended up landing on one typeface that could be a uniform typeface for the Bayshore. And then I also wanted to make sure that the typeface that I selected worked well in conjunction with the state tourism typeface that they've recently adopted for the Delaware word type. Because I wanted to be able to integrate that pre-existing Delaware word type into this identity so that it automatically played and connected with a state level tourism effort, because we feel like the product is obviously of that level of prominence. So then the third thing that we do is we talk about message, the story. What are we going to tell? And with that, I wrote a very quick brand statement. I'm going to read that to you now. We are the fields, marshes, rivers, and beaches of the Delaware Bayshore, stretching 100 miles along one of the richest and most biodiverse regions in the nation. We are the stories of the birth of this nation, the creation of the first state, the ratification of independence, and the protection of our freedom. We are the tales of forts, fire towers, and floating cabins. We are where crabbing is a way of life, birding can be a daily escape, hiking comes naturally, and the water beckons for you to explore its many meanderings. We are wildlife refuges, walking trails, biking paths, and a national park. We are the absolute opposite of beach traffic. We invite you to explore this amazing path. We encourage you to get lost in our past. We're excited for you to discover our hidden gems. We are the Delaware Bayshore, all American, all natural. So, what we've got there is we've got this brand statement that helps us to wrap our arms around some of the assets that we saw. And I want to simplify that down for you from my standpoint. As I go through, I started to see things and I started to classify those. And people, from a local perspective, it's very easy to boost something to a status that's maybe a little bit higher than it actually exists at. So I'm going to try to keep it real, but what's nice about keeping it real was as I started to think about this, I felt like you had 3 stories that truly landed on what would be considered globally relevant. That's pretty awesome. Now, most places, if you can land on one national relevant, that's pretty cool. The horseshoe crabs. The horseshoe crabs are truly globally relevant. It's funny, I mean, I cannot tell you how many times this week my wife has talked about horseshoe crabs to my children and how cool it is that they are the only thing the same age as the dinosaurs that existed. Now, I have no clue if she's right or not, but every time she says it, the kids light up like it's the most amazing thing ever. My daughter was sitting there talking about how, oh, that's cool, they're dinosaurs. So it's like, okay, if you want to think of them as dinosaurs, that's fine. The fact is, the story, the access, the ongoing impact that they have, there's something that can be experienced. Now, closely tied to it, but also completely independent in terms of attraction, is the birding. You have globally relevant birding. And we talked a lot over the course of this week about that fine line of dedication to an activity. When you own a mountain bike, it does not make you a mountain biker. Just because you own a pair of binoculars doesn't necessarily make you a birder. That transition and evolution from bird watching to birder status, the transition from someone who hikes to someone who is a hiker, someone who bikes to someone who is a bicyclist. We want to use the Delaware Bayshore as a place where those activities escalate. This is your opportunity to move your way up the scale. And the nice thing is, in virtually every one of those activity categories, we have that opportunity to escalate. Now, from a graphic standpoint, what I did here was I created a series that was based off of components. Now, this opens up an entire discussion of diplomacy and design by committee that I understand can easily happen. Oh, now tell me exactly, what is the silhouette of that fish that you decided to pick on there? And I get that. Like, I know that conversation is going to happen. Just to kind of go through so I can show you some stuff that I learned. Indigo warbler. Indigo bunting. Blue crab. We've got a standard, a landing mallard, and I don't know about, ducks are ducks, you know. It's I think I see mallards where I live, so I threw some ducks, but I'm gonna let y'all jump into that all you want. But you know, everything from the horseshoe crabs to the stripers, they're all things that I heard talked about over the course of the week. Now, I will tell you, as I went through this path, I had to ask myself, okay, what do I include? What do I not include? And I ended up including silhouettes of natural wildlife in the primary brand for a reason. I felt like it gave us this opportunity to really highlight some of the attractions and some of the things that you might see, but it also creates a baseline for us to expand the system and what it means. So, as we kind of jump in here, what we can see is we can see the overall identity. We can easily add in modifiers because the way that it's designed in a modular design format using these all caps and these kind of rectangles. And what that does is it allows you to bring in this state of Delaware word type. It allows you to bring in taglines. And you can layer those different builds the way you need to make sure that you're communicating the way that you can. Now, something else from a design standpoint, this is where I get to go all design nerd on you for a second. We have 5 different components, 5 different boxes, kind of as you make your way through. And you'll see the elements span the boxes. They actually break down the barriers and create connectivity. That is done as a deliberate design intent to actually create a logo system that carries you through a series of different components, just like the Byway carries you through this larger region. So from there, just from kind of a technical standpoint, always like to make sure that it works in one color. It works in black and white, because now we start to get into uses that might show up on signage. But the other thing that we have to realize is this is still very complex. Still has a lot going on with it. So I also wanted to create a cleaner, more compact version. So what we did there was we simply took that horseshoe crab silhouette, overlaid that kind of connection to the Byway. And what this allows us to do again is still works in our simplified 1 versions, but as we continue to go, it gives us super simple iconography that can come to stand for this unbelievably diverse area. So if we had started the whole process by only landing on the horseshoe crab, then it would be very easy for these other areas of interest to say, hey, we feel left out. But by being able to have a system that hones into it and understands where it lives and how it exists in terms of kind of creating and spurring this biodiversity and the symbol that it is of that biodiversity, I think that this gives us a real good opportunity to create that graphic spectrum. Now, once you land there, you get into the stuff that's kind of fun. You get into the opportunity for brand extension. You know that tagline, all American, all natural? You can do really fun stuff with that that's very simple and plays off of symbology. Now, one of the other things that was very interesting to me was, already talked about the relationship between the outdoors and the communities. What I wanted to do, once you create this Bayshore brand, it gives you this opportunity to create sub-brand groupings. So you have the Delaware Bayshore beaches, wrapping your arms around all of the beach communities, all the way from Augustine and Woodland Beach, all the way down to Broadkill and all the way to Lewis. Now, that is a clustering of similar offerings and similar experiences. But also, it's funny, we as a team kind of talked about how you see the beaches change as you move south. And that collection of beaches actually creates an even more dynamic experience. So the thing that you hit with is like, okay, we now have this destination clustering, but guess what? We've left communities out. Well, they fit into the region as well with the Bayshore river towns. So you've got these communities that are closely oriented to river and that river connection, and then you have these others that are more closely connected to beach. But combined, they create this truly dynamic relationship between the region, create relationships between communities that have never been clustered together like this before. You're not going to see a lot of places where you're putting, say, Port Penn and Milton into the same category. But now this collection of Bayshore river towns, it sets an opportunity for different access points, sets an opportunity for different connectivity between them, but then that combination creates this really dynamic clustering of the communities of the Bayshore. Then from there, you can start to get into some really interesting and fun programming to add additional meaning into the Bayshore. So you want to think through and create stuff that gets people excited. And you can kind of create it from scratch. I don't really care what it is. One of the things that I heard some crab cakes talked about with passion this week. Got a couple members of the team that are crab cake connoisseurs, shall we say. And, there's certain things out there that automatically evoke positivity. Crabs don't always. Crab festivals would be vastly different than crab cake festivals. Celebration of food. Celebration of sharing with one another. It's kind of interesting. One of the things, I worked with Athens, Alabama, and they wanted to create a signature festival. And, of course, they had this different history stories they were talking about and that kind of stuff. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, what really is going to happen at this festival? And they said, I don't know. I mean, probably going to be funnel cake. There's going to be a lot of funnel cake. Realistically, that's what the festival is going to be. So what I did was I came up with this idea of having the Athens Grease Festival, Grease. And it was a celebration of all things fried. Well, in the first year of holding this festival, this one community was able to create $60,000 in profit to help them drive efforts forward. They actually had people writing health-oriented articles about how it was okay to splurge as long as you were responsible the rest of the time, and using the Grease Festival as an opportunity to do that. Now, that example is one that just kind of sets the stage. We want to expose and reintroduce locals to this region. The thing that I heard over and over and over again, and we talked with folks all throughout the way, I was telling a story about Bowers, it's like I get stuck at that stoplight at Bowers every time I drive. And yesterday or 2 days ago was the first time I had ever been to Bowers. And we need to give people the opportunity for them to explore. We need to give locals the motivation to put themselves in the exploratory mindset, because when you live somewhere, you think you know it. So you've got to kind of spur that, and food is a really good way to spur it. Now, believe it or not, another way to spur it is alcoholic beverage. I'm just throwing that out there. You see, I'm not showing a beer festival, I'm just showing a crab cake festival, but the creativity is something that's up to you all as a community. A couple of the other things that ran through my mind were, from an economic development standpoint, being able to create economic development goals for the region as a whole. And what those goals would allow you to do is to celebrate success throughout the Bayshore, even if that success is not immediately in your area of influence. The thing that I threw out yesterday, and I kind of pitched it over to Dido, was the concept of what I'm calling 3-2-1 in the Bayshore. 3-2-1 stands for 3 new restaurants, 2 new outdoor-oriented experience businesses, and 1 general store type provider. And I feel like if you were to be able to add those 6 new businesses along the Bayshore, those are businesses that are going to directly impact both the tourism experience as well as the quality of life of the residents. And the thing that I don't want to focus in on yet is I don't care where each restaurant goes. 3 new restaurants to the collective help to create a better destination. And we're at the phase right now where we are cultivating the traffic. So we can't get into the individual, border wars yet. It's thinking holistically about the economic growth that will allow us to achieve a certain level of density. Now, that density comes from easily understandable access to activities. So what I also did was I went through and I created a series of activity icons. And now this is not everything. This icon system probably will continue to grow. But starting to tie things in together and being able to connect them to one another so that you can talk about the activities. Now, one of the great things that we talked about over the course of this week was if you're stopping at a state park, if you're stopping at Fish and Wildlife Land, there are different signage for different kinds of outdoor activities, as well as just community-oriented activities. What if we could introduce some sort of universal, unifying add-on to some of those signs? We were able to review the current sign for the Ashton track that's getting ready to go up just north of Port Penn. And there's the ability to add a secondary panel along the bottom of that can talk to what activities are allowed and aren't allowed. And one of the big things from a tourism standpoint that I always try to tell folks, signs, we need to be real mindful of how we use signs. Typically what we do is we sign things after we identify there's a problem. So you put up a sign welcoming someone, and next thing you know, they light a picnic shelter on fire. So you put a sign that says, no lighting picnic shelters on fire. And then next thing you know, somebody decides that they're going to park their car in a parking lot and take the wheels off of it and leave it on blocks for 3 months. So you put a sign up that says, no abandoning vehicles with no wheels. And you have signs that are so individual to certain circumstances, but then when you stand back and look at the big picture, you have one welcome and 18 messages saying, don't do this and don't do this and don't do this and don't do this because we are so much fun. So being able to integrate in experience into signage is something that's hugely important. And the thing that I always tell folks is a lot of times, if we're being honest, we understand that signage and announcing policy simply gives us the ability to enforce. We understand that policy has to be posted before we can enforce that policy. Now, just because you don't want somebody to do something doesn't mean the sign has to be 14 feet long. So being able to have an orientation place, making sure that everything's posted, but then also making sure that that transition in orientation is a positive-oriented one instead of a negative-oriented one. Signage throughout the byway is going to be hugely important. I wanted to show just a simple way that the branding could integrate into standard MUTC standard wayfinding. So, we've got our appropriate letters that are for most roadways, either going to be 4-inch or 6-inch letters, and then you can simply integrate that logo in one color into that standardized DOT type signage. Once you get on site and you move from wayfinding signage into interpretive signage, that's where the flourish of design can really occur. But being able to fit that in to this wayfinding from a DOT side is an important step. And then we talked about those add-on signs. I mean, imagine how nice it would be if it was simply a horizontal panel added on the bottoms of those signs, making a connector into the byway, and then letting you know what activities are allowed. And if you feel like it is essential, you can also, with icons, let people know what activities are not allowed. Some states, and we've been doing some park system signage. We're in the process right now of creating a comprehensive wayfinding system and park signage system for Raleigh, North Carolina. And what they decided they wanted to do was they wanted to have every icon on every sign. And then only the ones that were highlighted are allowed. They felt like that created a certain sense of standardization from park to park. I don't know that that's necessary. I kind of feel like it's graphic overkill to a certain degree. So with that, though, you start to see how the stories come together, and you start to see how you can kind of tell what you can do in particular areas. But then also being able to create a platform where you can tell the story. The photography that I got over the course of this week blew my mind. Normally what I do when I'm involved in a multi-day process is I pull photos every day. So I'll review them every night. And I didn't do that this week. I waited until last night and I reviewed everything in one batch. And I did that on purpose because I felt like that would be the best way for me to get my arms wrapped around the Bayshore as a singular region. I didn't actually want the days that we decided to schedule the way we saw it to break the product down into categories and into clumpings. I was astonished. We had a couple folks over at the house, and I kept turning my computer around and it's, oh, look at this. Oh my gosh, look at this. And they kept asking the question, where is this? What state were you working in? You know, it's like stuff they had never seen before. But I think it's going to be really interesting and really important for us to make that connection between outdoor resources and the history story. The history tales that you have are very interesting stories. Some are a lot harder to get to than others. We need to do a much better job in a long-term goal in interpreting that history better along the way. Because some you really have to work to get. Others are very, very easy to experience. As you go through this process, being able to show different clusterings from singular communities so that they feel connected into this region, we really are introducing an identity from scratch. I mean, the Bayshore makes sense. It's not like anybody is saying, oh my God, how'd you come up with that name? You know, but it is still a new connection. So being able to show these communities how they have stories to tell, they contribute, and their character is part of this extremely unique place. Being able to highlight amenities and, you know, all along the way, just finding different little things. Anybody know where this is? That weren't with us? Right, it's in Delaware City. And, you know, being able to give very intriguing imagery that draws people in to read and find out a little bit more. When you look at the situation here, and I said this on Monday, in Delaware, you've got almost a third of the state exists east of 1. And 1 serves as this Great Wall of China. It's this, you know, this traffic barrier that nobody really knows exactly how to cross. And you know, the east to west traffic in many parts of the state is virtually non-existent. And being able to speak to a statewide level about the prominence of this region and the things that they have to offer is something that I think is vitally important. And then this one was for Karen and Anthony in particular. You know, again, being able to focus in on some of those dynamic connections between history and outdoors. It's kind of funny. I made the comment to them because, I mean, literally, you know, we're hearing stories all week long about how they go on excursion trips. Anthony's on his way to an excursion trip to do birding. And there's a very high passion level there. And I made the point to him. I said, you know, birding is an interesting hobby because to an outsider, birding is actually something that's very easy to be dismissed as silly. You know, it's like if you're a non-birder, but all it takes is 1 hour of being around someone who's passionate about it and feeling the excitement of kind of the search and the discovery, and then that whole introduction of this concept of collection and kind of listing and earning this repertoire is something that is very, very intriguing. And it is no doubt to me that when you look at national trends, birding is growing at a pace that is outpacing virtually every other outdoor activity. It is one of the most diverse age groupings in terms of activities, but it is also one of the most affluent collections of outdoor enthusiasts that you have. Now, whenever you're talking about using outdoor amenities for economic stimulus, those are all the ingredients that you want. Broad age range with lots of money, lots of interest, and the desire to leave a very low impact on what they experience. That's all pretty interesting. So, you know, with that kind of gives you a little sneak peek of some of the stuff that I'm thinking I want to wrap around and talk about a couple of the big things that I want to make sure that we hammer home. I think it's extremely important for us to be able to make a relevant connection between the communities and the Bayshore and the communities in the Byway. And I feel like that kind of mid-range clustering of river towns and beaches is a really great engagement strategy to be able to foster additional relationships between the communities while also creating more of an experience density package to be able to offer up to people that might find their way here on the Byway. I took about 600 photos, I think. That's somewhat typical. But typically what happens when I take 600 photos is that means about 35 or 40 of them are usable. When I went through the process last night of kind of cleaning them up and checking them out, of the 600, there were over 300 that I would be comfortable putting in a magazine ad. I think that's kind of telling. And the diversity of what was captured there. Everything from, capturing a fox crossing a dirt path, the wildlife, the marshlands, the beach. I mean, I don't know if y'all picked up on that shot down in Broadkill Beach during the brand statement of just the couple on this. I mean, it was crazy. It's like, oh my God, they got stuck in the Sahara. It's like, no, that's in Delaware. But, being able to capture those images and kind of connect it all together, I think that this is an extremely unique opportunity. One of the next things that I would like to see come out of this is we've had this extremely dynamic partnership and relationship between DelDOT and DNREC. Over the course of this, the cooperation that we saw between those agencies as well as the outside partners, we've been able to bring in Dido, and Dido has some really what I see as three very interesting angles in the Bayshore Byway. One is the Downtown Delaware program and the development of small towns and their economic stability moving forward. The second is obviously tourism and the economic impact that tourism has, and really the creation of a brand new product to be sold on the state level. This gives state tourism an easy way to tell the story of a region that oftentimes goes unnoticed from a state level tale, because they get right in and they tell the story of a speedway that brings hundreds of thousands of people for events, whether it's music or whether it's sporting events, and beach destinations that bring, visitors from all over. So this gives us a very competitive way to enter into that state level story. The third and final point from Dido, though, is the ability to focus on small business development. And I feel like the state of Delaware, because of its size and the way that you're able to do business here, I feel like you have the opportunity to create a dynamic model on a national level to show how cooperation between DNREC and Dido can create an ecotourism entrepreneur program that focuses on helping people fast track into the ecotourism industry and potentially be able to leverage access point opportunities to be able to drive fast track to profit, and also experience buying economies by clustering together outfitting opportunities throughout a large region. So I'm really excited about some of those byproducts that could come out of that. With that, you've been sitting here listening to me talk for 45 minutes. I'd love to hear your initial reactions, your thoughts on this kind of first draft, the overall strategy of the Byway as a destination, the way that we integrate the communities into that Byway, and the way that we tell this story. Your turn.